welcome back to Frankly Speaking in conjunction with the Knights of Christendom. I'm joined here with my good friend, Anthony Chioza. Anthony, my friend, I'm cruising the internet here, and I'm finding an article here from the Wall Street Journal entitled, quote, "A generation of American men give up on college. I just feel lost." And the article goes on to talk about the disparity of college attendees between men and women. Women now comprise 60% of all college students at 2- and 4-year universities. Men are down to 40%. This kind of really goes in line with the feminization of our culture that we've seen, the revolutionary feminist culture that we've seen over the past 60, 70 years, where men are losing their place. They're losing their place as head of households. They're losing their place in regards to the status of our institutions within society. They're losing their place as fathers, as women attain more and more rights and power in that respect. And in general, we've seen a society that has attacked men really since the 1960s at the very least. Men are falling further and further behind. I have my thoughts. I think there's, a liberal sort of ideology that plays a role in this, that has purposely attacked men in a lot of different ways, not just socially or culturally, but also biologically. I think, with the sexualized cultures, men's natural sexual drive has been distorted and misconstrued. College sort of plays a role in that. I've talked a lot about the college experience in America, which is diabolical to the core, in my opinion, right? You send your kids off to college, whether they're young men or young ladies, and the expectation is this American rite of passage where we're supposed to, experiment with sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and then we expect these individuals come out of college and somehow figure it all out and, partake in the economic engine of prosperity. All the while, though, the culture continues to break. Men have been under assault and under attack for a long time. I think it's clear now. Anthony, my friend, what do you think is behind this? What do you think is going on? And is this just more hyperbole by a bunch of men who just are being outpaced and outdone by women who are bigger and stronger? I am woman, hear me roar. Or is there some legitimate complaints that the liberal society we now live in has diminished the role of men?
I think the experiences men are having are genuine. You wouldn't see kind of secular movements like the whole MGTOW community crop up if it weren't the case. There's definitely something there. And I think you rightly point out that it does go back to liberalism essentially, because it's like you always point out, if you're willing to compromise your morality, if you're willing to compromise your Catholic state in life, it is very easy to succeed in this country. Get numerous divorces if you need to. Don't have kids until, contracept until, you're in your 30s and you're finally considering yourself stable. And in some ways, the economic system has brought this about. We see right now it's coming to its fruition. This is something I warned about for years, Frank, and nobody really took it too seriously. But now we see the chickens coming home to roost with rising inflation as the Federal Reserve keeps printing off more and more money. Well, people didn't feel it right away, and they thought, well, it's that guy's just kind of out there, in reference to me, or just dismiss it outright. But the fact is the velocity of money has something to do with that too. And even initially, when all this money was printed off here in the beginning, you saw that there wasn't too much inflation based on these CPI numbers to begin with. Of course, those have been fixed since the 70s, so they don't really accurately portray what's really going on anymore. But even still, people were saving that money that was being doled out. Well, now we see it looks like the velocity of money must be picking up because we are seeing this inflation cost pick up. Now, I don't know when costs of goods have ever gone down on major purchases. Houses, cars, all these things. Yes, you have a housing bubble and a correction in the housing market in 2008, but ultimately, when you look at other sectors, it's like prices are just constantly going up. Food prices are constantly going up. And so young men, not only are they not able to obtain work they can support a family on without having to have a woman go to work, but because of what has happened with contraception and the like, these men are not even able to do what they are programmed to do, which is to love and support a family. Because women that have been secularized by this Protestant culture that existed here in the United States, they abandon men for their career. All right? Now, granted, some of them, and many of them, in fact, perhaps did not want to do this. There are other variables. For example, again, inflation rising in the 70s. Is there any coincidence that we start getting the propaganda that women, you should have a career and you should feel terrible if you're a stay-at-home mom because, wow, you're not really doing anything productive for society at all? Very communist. Very communist, and absolutely not true. The woman is not only equal in dignity to man, but she has a special role that forms the men in our civilization. But women were kicked out to work as inflationary costs took off, and it took two people to support a family. So men, I think rightly so, they feel defeated. What's the point in going to a 4-year university when you're going to come out with potentially no job prospects, a broken economy, and over $100,000 in debt? And on top of that, the women in your civilization have gone off the rocker because of the propaganda they're getting.
Well, Anthony, I think you bring up some very interesting points. I think there's a general problem here with how the whole college experience in general really goes against natural law in some respects. First of all, I don't think all men are meant to go to college, first and foremost, and yet we've made that the highest standard in our civilization. In fact, if we don't go to not only a certain level of education, but even a certain status of sort of name brand colleges, we're looked down upon as a lower class of citizen in the civilization. So much emphasis on not only getting that degree, but where you went to college. Very big deal. It's the reason why when you look at, for example, an institution like the presidency of the United States, what is the first thing that is touted by the media or by the elites? It's where he went to college, right? Cornell or Harvard or Yale or what it may be. It's a social status of sorts. And I've always found it interesting because these universities have become little liberal communist indoctrination centers. And you got a situation where parents have now bought into this idea. I got to send my kid to college. I got to send him to college. And in order for him to get an education, and through that education, he achieves social status and economic viability throughout the course of his life. But at the same time, those children are being lost socially, ethically, and morally in every capacity. So in many respects, we're asking our kids to sell their souls in order to acquire both social and material success. I mean, I think that's the first problem. I think the second problem for men is that they have a biological nature that works against them. I think a lot of men are ready for marriage at a relatively young age and are ready to, again, start partaking in their reproductive system, engaging in the act of sexuality. I think marriage is a civilizing force, or always has been a civilizing force throughout human history, right? This is why in the old world, people got married at a much younger age. Men generally got married at the age of 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. Young ladies will get married at 15, 16, 17. They are complementary creatures. Women mature much faster. Men have a sexual nature they have to deal with. Now, that doesn't, exclude the fact that, young men should have a choice of vocations. If they want to go to college, they should have the freedom to go to college. But not everybody is built that way. If men want to choose the vocation of the priesthood, if they're called to be, or at least serve God, that should be in play as well too. But I think here, again, when we push education to a degree where now it becomes an economic sort of financial benefit to elites and college professors and college administration, to where now we've pushed out college and mandated such prerequisites to where young men are going to college are 24, 25, 26, 27, in some cases 30 years old, depending on the field and trade that you're going into. It's going to be virtually impossible for young men to stay chaste, especially young men that have not chosen the vocation of the priesthood. So that naturally works against men as well too. I think the rise of feminism and women going into the workforce and women effectively taking the role of men. I mean, listen, I know this is going to be controversial, but there's a reason why women started dressing like men 40, 50 years ago, right? Because ideologically, it was the principle of replacing the man as the head of household. It was an attack on the patriarchal society and the duties and the natural calling that men have to provide and take care of for their families. And in that respect, women have been screwed, right? My wife tells me all the time, Anthony, how she despises the feminist ideology because it forced her to go outside sort of her female nature. In the sense that we're all forced now to go out and serve a boss and serve the usury system even more, which a lot of women don't want to do that. Women want to serve their men. They want to serve their families. They want to serve their children. It's a natural calling that a lot of women have, right, that God gave us. And it's how we were sort of predestined, or should I say hardwired throughout all of really the analogy of the faith that we learned from our ancestors. It's why our culture, to be honest with you, was much more healthier 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or 500 years ago, because we understood these natural roles. And yet, as we reverse these natural roles, we've seen civilization descend into chaos. Again, what does all have in common? It's been liberalism that has divided the sexes, distorted their natural roles, and in many respects confused everybody. And in that respect, you've taken women, you put them in the role of men. Where do men go now? There's no place for them to go. Of course, men are opting out. This is why men are addicted to porn. It's why they're addicted to video games. And quite frankly, why not only do they have no interest in going to college, the same exact numbers show that men have no interest in getting married anymore because all the incentive for men getting married has been lost because of what we just laid out.
Right. And you will hear in the traditional community, some people say, well, you know what, it's the man's responsibility to go out and get that one job that he can support his entire family on and to keep searching for that one job. But the fact of the matter is that not everybody's IQ is the same, and that IQ is a pretty good indicator of how successful you are going to be in life. So some men are going to be stuck at a certain level of income. And really the problem at that point is the usury system. You know, the men can't just go out to the factory anymore and support a family, right? Because just wages are gone. We've got cheap Chinese labor. And everybody here in the West, I suppose, is supposed to go into the service sector and find a job there. And this obviously is not a recipe for being able to support a family. So for many men, as a matter of fact, I mean, you'd have to look at the spread of IQ. Those that are really on the higher end, there's not too many of them. Now, the other part of the problem is you're expected to make money in the stock market these days, essentially, because now we don't really have any place to put it anymore, right? I mean, where else do we go with money to save it or to try and earn interest on it in this system that has been created? We've been kind of thrown into it, brought up in it. We see the issues with it. We see that there are ways back to some sanity via perhaps corporatism or something like this. But the way it stands right now, it's just not entirely viable. Now, what I would offer as some advice as a Catholic man raising 4 boys is that your young men should be learning a trade early on. I personally am homeschooling my children. I know a lot of other traditional Catholics are homeschooling their children as well. I don't think college is necessarily a bad pursuit, but if they are going to do that, they should be staying home. They shouldn't be living on campus somewhere. There's temptation there. That's probably a proximate occasion of sin, just to be out in that kind of atmosphere. And then also, I would say, they need to consult with their spiritual director and really think about that. Is college a path for me right now before I get married? Or am I going to be able to accomplish, the task of staying chaste essentially until I am married, right? So we're all called to that life in one capacity or another. But the problem is, as a young man with hormones being very active, that it's not something you can entirely ignore. Now, not everybody's exactly the same. For some people, the struggle will be a lot more difficult. And these are the types of things that have to be discerned. On the other end of the stick, I would say traditionalist women living in the day and age should not forego a college education. And again, I would say stay at home, because that might be needed, because you do end up in circumstances, I have seen this, where the traditional man runs out on the woman, leaves her with 8 to 12 children, and no way to support them really, because she did not get the education she needed. And although the traditional community is very tight, they will raise money for the family. I have seen one-time donations that average quite a bit. I don't know what that does for the family on the whole extensively, past maybe a year of income if you're lucky. So, unfortunately, these are circumstances we have to think about. We do have to use prudential judgment. And we're really living in this kind of post-industrial era here in the West, where our industry has been shipped over to China, which is just, it's incredible to me that this has happened. It's not obviously beyond my imagination. I get it. We saw this happen starting under Clinton, China becoming a part of the World Trade Organization, and from there this problem really just ballooned. And at the same time, you see here, while I don't agree with the unions, you see unions beginning to fall apart in this country at about the same time. And so we have really the last mechanism for negotiating wages was really falling apart. Now, again, I think corporatism might be a solution there on that front. And we've talked about that before in prior casts. But, just some pragmatic advice there. It's just my 2 cents. I could obviously be wrong.
Yeah, Anthony, I think you bring up a few good points there. The first of which, I think it's clear we've seen a general trend of Americans being forced into service sector jobs in America, while those productive, meaningful jobs, those that pay, I guess what we call them, a living wage of sorts, have disappeared more and more. And this is why investment into corporations, such as the stock market, has become so viable. In many respects, it's the only way, right? I mean, I would argue that the housing market and the stock market is how most people, average people, are surviving these days. And we'll see how long that train can ride for. I think it's clear over the past, let's call it 50, 60 years, as private union sectors have begun to sort of lose their role in civilization, wages have gone down because there is no negotiating power for labor for that respect. Now, I get it. In a time of corona, we have a labor shortage. Nobody wants to go to work because the government is giving out checks. For the first time in a long time, labor actually has a voice to really negotiate against capital. But that's an anomaly precisely because the government is printing up money left and right and sending everybody paychecks. It's not, again, an altruistic, free market kind of, situation here. It's a situation where there's just extenuating circumstances regarding COVID. We've seen the labor unions rise in the public sector, of course, over the past 30, 40 years. And then because do you really need negotiations in the public sector? Because government is going to make government employees happy anyways, regardless, because guess what? That's their power base. They're going to get themselves and all their families out to vote for big government candidates anyways. Who's here to negotiate for labor? If the labor unions have collapsed in the name of free markets, nobody really. This is where the corporatist system had a little bit more say-so for labor, but that's another discussion for another time. We have become a service sector economy. And in that respect, many men, who I think are more creative and oftentimes want to produce something functional, something that is very sufficient in the art or the trade that they partake in, is very important. They could take care of whatever skill that is in the home for their families and take it outside the home in order to earn a living. That has been taken away. And we've said to young men, and really everybody, go to college, go to college, go to college. And again, I'm not sure all men are ready. In some respects, again, women have a biological advantage, right? Because women can control their sexual nature much easier than men can. So women can go to college at 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, and if they want to, if they choose to, control that sexual nature and hold off, while men struggle with them more. Now, Granted, the liberal culture has liberalized everything and unleashed the female sexual drive and completely distorted it. And now young ladies are going to college and partaking of this college lifestyle that really brings a lot of problems to women in that regard as well, too. That's why I say both men and women are broken in this society. It's not a gender war as men are better than women or women are better than men, but that's how this civilization has framed it, right, Anthony? I mean, just like we have this left and right debate in politics or in culture, in society, we divide everybody at every level, black, white, male, female, everybody is divided, and this is what we've seen here. And now there's been a competitive sort of notion where women are going into college to compete with men for the same jobs. What does that mean? What does that mean in the end? Particularly if women in certain capacities achieve maturity and really can control their sexual nature better than men at an earlier age. It inherently gives women an advantage in the marketplace in that respect. This is why men are being lost, but we don't acknowledge these fundamental truths because we've thrown natural law out the window in America and really in the West since the Enlightenment. And it's not just liberals that have partaken in this, but it's been the conservative right that has participated in this in throwing out natural law. And really, while they may complain how men are just being screwed left and right everywhere, it has been the right that has done just as much damage as the left by not acknowledging natural law.
Yeah, let me just say that I agree with you on all of those points. And what I'd like to highlight is the COVID situation. Number one, there's variables that could cause a financial meltdown, COVID being one of them. However, if we look back at the data, the Federal Reserve was already trying to clear the books, and they were already trying to raise interest rates, and it wasn't working. This was going to happen regardless, and they were going to have to go back to quantitative easing, which they have. So regardless of COVID, this would have happened anyway. It may have taken a longer period of time, but we were still moving towards it because they were trying to avoid a financial collapse. And, the 2008 correction never finished. It was artificially propped up once again. Now, I would also point out something you highlight about this COVID situation is the lack of workers. What this also shows is that these companies that are trying to get more workers, they will offer higher wages, but they can't offer much higher. And when they do, if they were able to offer much higher, or rather if they could, they would probably go out of business because inflation has hurt everybody now. It's gotten to the point where it's not only hurting families, but now it's hurting small businesses and medium-sized businesses. Can corporations weather the storm? Probably. But at the end of the day, at some point, the lines are going to begin to cross for these large corporations too, and they will no longer be able to offer anybody any semblance of a living wage. This current economic system that classical liberalism has given us, because some of these actually all of these economic theories that our system is based on comes from that. And the platform for the central banking itself is a tenet of communism itself. So this leads to the perpetual warfare state, and also what we see now, the perpetual welfare state for the rich here in the United States, where if you're in a company that's too big to fail, well, don't worry. The little guys will bail you out. We're going to put the bill on them, and that's what this has happened with. That's what's happened with everybody now, and everybody's feeling it, and families are feeling it. And this again goes back to the man trying to just support his family, take care of his family. Now what? The kids have to go out and start participating in labor again. Are we going to hit that point because the perpetual daycare centers won't be able to stay out open anymore to take care of the kids? It's madness, Frank.
Now, Anthony, let me just go back and clarify a point I made there. When I say that classical liberals have contributed to breaking down natural law, my position is quite simple. When the classical liberals and the Enlightenment thinkers sort of removed the supernatural elements of the faith from the greater premise of politics and culture, that created sort of a void in the hearts and minds of people in regard to their faith. And what the Enlightenment thinkers did was they elevated, again, the materialistic world. This is why as Americans, we've come to really worship at the altar of what? Prosperity, materialism, and accomplishing everything of the world because we de-emphasize the spiritual nature of the faith. And it's very difficult because in one sense, we're asking men to be the providers of this material world, right? We're also asking men to be the priests of the household. We've kind of forgotten that in a post-Christendom society. But still, men traditionally were built to be the providers and the protectors of the family, while women stayed at home to raise children. But if we create a society where the greatest means of success and honor is now achieving prosperity and material success, how can you ask women to stay home and just put out babies and take care of families when that inherently doesn't bring in material or economic prosperity, right? We're asking women to take a lesser role. This is where the classical liberals have contributed, again, to the fall of natural law, because we've elevated and distorted our values in society, where God and spirituality and salvation came first. There was a natural role, a natural law of sorts, where men and women together function as a unit as God intended. The two become one, just as the Bible said. But a society that only focuses on naturalism and material goods, the two do not become one. Women have wanted to become individual. Ironically enough, the same individual rights and principles that were unleashed during the Enlightenment. Can you blame women for contracepting? Can you blame women for aborting their babies if at the end of the day the greatest achievement within society is making the money in America and in the West? Materialism, power. This is what we've shot for in America, in post-Enlightenment society, and women have wanted to partake of this. This is what's distorted all of our civilization. The fact that we've ignored the one true triune God and any role in our society, privatized religion with these personal moral codes in the name of religious liberty, and we've forgotten our relationship with God. And now the sexes, the relationship between the sexes is completely disordered, my friend.
That's a brilliant point. I'm glad you clarified that, because essentially the system we have right now does focus on materialism first. Obviously, probably a byproduct of puritanical rule, Calvinism, right? Health and wealth gospel. We see these things transform and become more and more insidious. However, the other problem that we need to look at is that this is why we're falling into communism now, because communism at the end of the day is also reductionist and materialist. And so we see both America and other communist states like China on this reductionist, materialist path, and atheistic in many ways too, with the rise of the nuns and, practically speaking, no religion, no moral order, like you always point out. So, brilliant point, my friend. And I would just say also, you bring up the dignity of women. Well, look at what happened to the dignity of women and their role immediately when this country was founded, with Protestantism and this idea of pluralism and all these different Protestant sects devolving into nothing, as we constantly talk about here. But they were relegated to simple marital contracts. It was no longer a sacrament. Okay, well, there's the first blow to women right there. And then they have continued throughout classical liberal society. So, of course, it manifests itself eventually as communism does, because that's also rooted in classical liberalism. The communist revolutions, what did they do right away? They told the women to go out and work. You're going to be like a man. Put on the uniform. That's what they did to them in Russia. Well, we did the same thing here in the United States. We just did it slower.
Yeah, we did it slower and we did it different too. That's all. It's just a matter of the population at hand, where a particular culture is, and what kind of tactics you use to convince people to gravitate toward evil. You know, I know for many years Americans used to sort of complain or screech horrors of the China, one-child policy, where women were forced to have abortions, and while that was terrible, especially if the autonomous choice was taken away to have more than one child, which violates God's laws in that respect. Have we been really any different than China here in America? Sure, it wasn't coerced, but we've just propagandized and brainwashed young ladies to kill their own babies in their wombs. In the end, it's the same effect. You want to talk to me about constitutional rights and all that? It doesn't matter. The child birth rate in America is dropping now to an all-time low, and precisely because same reason we see all over the world, right? The liberalization of the world. The only reason why the American birth rate only stayed up as high as it did for as long as it did was because of immigration, right? We're the Americans who love prosperity, making the money, materialism. We're all the Americans. We love the 8-bedroom house, but only have one kid, right? Oh, sorry. 1.8 kids now. That's what we're down to. So it's below the sustainability rate of the population. Listen, Anthony, as we wrap this conversation up here, a lot of feminists and liberals and even classical liberals are going to say that we are anti-woman. For some of the things we've said, because we believe in certain traditional roles of men and women and how they were defined by divine origin. Let me just state for the record that I have stated over and over and over that the feminist movement has not only hurt men, but I think it's actually been harsher on women. It's been much worse than women. Women have been asked to pick up the slack in so many areas of everyday life now. There's a reason why men are addicted to porn, pot, and video games at this point in time, because women have been forced to pick up the slack here or volunteer to pick up the slack. And guess what? The feminists are not there. They're not there to support the women who want to be with their children. They're not there for the women who want to be at home with their husbands and take care of their families or do whatever it is, sort of the natural callings of what women sort of were called to do. So many women are actually miserable now, but have been forced out into the usury system, have been forced out to support the mortgage and the taxes and the car payments and everything that we have now, because there are many women that would like to stay home. But let me just say this, as a Catholic, you know what, that whole anti-feminist card, it doesn't work with us. It doesn't, because our general is, guess who? The Holy Mother of God. Hail Mary, full of grace. She is the highest honored human being the world has ever known within our Catholic faith. That which is fully human that we honor the most is the Holy Mother of God. I am more pro-women than anybody, any feminist, or any really liberal could ever be. I've served my wife, I served my daughter, I served my mother for a lifetime. And women are the most important people in my life to me. They've always have been, because I see a different role for women as sort of comparatively defined with the liberal nature of civilization. Doesn't make me anti-woman. In fact, I would argue it makes me love women even more than the feminist movement, because I respect women in the way God ordained and socially ordered our civilization. When you go against that, you're actually anti-woman. That's why I said the liberal feminist movement hates women. It looks to destroy women and put a burden and a curse on women. In fact, liberalism, feminism is the curse of Eve that is playing out before our very eyes in our civilization. Look around. Women aren't happy. They haven't been happy, and they won't ever be happy until we get back to honoring the one true God, Anthony, and the roles that God intended for both men and women. My friend, your final thoughts.
My final thoughts parallel yours, my friend, and I would only add to that if liberalism and the Protestant rebellion had not occurred, we would have seen this transition from an agrarian society to an industrial society. We would have seen this take place in a much more orderly and really Catholic way, in which the dignity of the man and the woman would have both been preserved, and we would not find ourselves in these strange situations that we're trying to negotiate as Catholics, living inside of these liberalized nations to the point where they're falling to communism.
Very well said, my friend, and I think I'll close off by saying you're absolutely right. Liberalism has distorted everything. Post-Enlightenment, classical liberalism, progressivism, it's all the same to me in nature, to be honest with you. I think it's distorted the roles of men and women. It's why we're at each other's throats. But it's distorted because it's gone off the rails in regards to God's laws and natural laws. We don't acknowledge the one true triune God anymore. The 2,000-year analogy of the faith that the classical liberals decided just to erase, I should say, using propaganda as a means to bring about this brave new liberal world. And look where we're at. The problems of modernity, the broken family, the broken culture, the genocides, the homicides of the past 200 years, all the bloody revolutions, the corruption everywhere, the gulags, the world wars, the all-out war theory. Hey, you can't blame that on Catholics, right? You want to pick your little small example, Galileo or the Inquisitions, which were minute in the end, which all have, again, nuances there that you guys never want to talk about. The point is this is the liberal civilization. You guys brought the destruction, and you can't blame Catholics anymore, my friends. Feminism, really the pride of Eve in many respects, it's been brought about by liberal civilization. There's no way around it. You can't blame anybody else but yourselves. Classical liberals have participated in this, and guess what? The progressives are merely the offspring of the classical liberals. This is why we have a fallen world and a fallen nature that continues to, well, fall even more, I guess you could say. I mean, we're going off a cliff at this point in time. What else is there really to say? Hey, I want to thank my friend Anthony Chiosa tonight for joining me. This is Frank signing off. Once again, for Frankly Speaking and the Knights of Christendom, good night, everybody.